We'll get started, everyone. Hello, thank you so much for being here. My name is Hilary Gove, and I am the director of the Housing Opportunity Program in the, well, I guess still sort of newly created Maine Office of Community Affairs. And for those who don't know about MOCA, Maine Office of Community Affairs, we are a fairly new office that was created to be a one-stop shop to support municipalities with a whole host of issues, anything from housing to climate, land use issues. And if we can't do something in-house, we can connect you with other state government officials or entities that can essentially solve the problems. So the Housing Opportunity Program moved this past September into the Maine Office of Community Affairs. So you'll see, on these slides that we have different branding now, and that we're in the new office and not the Department of Economic and Community Development where we previously were. So I'm here today to talk about LD 1829 and LD 2173. And just by a show of hands, who has heard of these pieces of legislation or LD 2003? Okay, good, great. So we're starting people are aware of this legislation and sort of have an understanding of, where we've been and sort of where we're going. But today I'm really going to be focusing on 1829 and 2173 as opposed to sort of past pieces of legislation. But certainly if there are questions that are more foundational, happy to answer those as well. Oh, it was working. Let's see.
What about now? Okay, moved for me.
Okay, great. So to start off, I'm just going to provide a brief overview of 1829 to tell you where we were about a year ago, and then I'll go into 2173. And throughout the presentation, it's sort of like a mix between the two, right? Like I'm sort of just covering what's applicable to your municipalities at this point in time and what needs to be complied by July 1st, 2027. So just as a brief recap, 1829 was passed in 2025 by the legislature and signed by the governor. So this was a piece of legislation that built on LD 2003. So there were 23 sections. It covered a whole host of topics, even broader than LD 2003, including fire suppression sprinklers in accessory dwelling units, rate of growth ordinances, adding additional structure types to what could have an ADU, and also training for planning board members. This specific piece of legislation had a couple deadlines, but the first deadline was January 1st, 2026 for local compliance. All right, so that's what was passed in 2025. Fast forward to this past spring, LD 2173 passed. And I'm sure many of you probably were part of this process. There was a pretty robust engagement from municipalities and other stakeholders, planners during this process to make some changes to fix some of the small errors that occurred in the legislation and also sort of acknowledging some of the areas where tweaking needed to be made. So this passed in April of 2026. This was signed by the governor. And this refined and amended some language from 1829. So that piece of legislation has 25 sections in all, and most of it was adjusting requirements from 1829. And in some cases, this was returning some authority to municipalities and clarified some things that maybe just weren't clear from 1829. I'll talk a little later about rate of growth ordinances, but that was part of the legislation. It also amended other bills as far as mostly compliance related, but LD 997, which has to do with commercial residential uses in commercial zones, and LD 427, which has to do with parking in designated growth areas. And also, I think this is the key to LD 2173, which I'm sure I'll have a side relief for, that it did extend the deadline for municipal implementation for the majority of the sections until July 1st, 2027. Like it's, should I work on it?
No, I'll do it. I'll try to do it.
Thank you. Okay, so moving forward in this presentation, we're sort of just combining 1829 and 2173. But the topic areas that I'm going to talk about are multifamily allowances, minimum lot sizes, lot area per dwelling unit or density requirements, accessory dwelling units, specifically the changes that 2173 created, affordable housing density bonus, particularly the height bonus that was part of 2173, rate of growth ordinances, planning board training requirements, subdivision review changes, childcare facilities in residential areas, housing in commercial zones, parking requirements, and then some miscellaneous sort of definitions and deadlines, which I've already sort of mentioned, but that's what we're covering today. Great. So diving right into probably I would say the meatiest and maybe most concerning topic for a lot of you in this room is talking about the section of LG 2173 that is requiring municipalities to re-examine their minimum lot sizes and their density requirements for specifically in areas that are in growth areas or areas with public water and public sewer. So generally speaking, LG 2003 is permitting an allowance for 3 units per lot in residential areas. That's the general rule. Then 4 units are allowed as a permitted use in areas that are designated growth areas or areas served by public water and public sewer. And these units may be attached or detached. And there is the ability for municipalities to still establish dimensional requirements as long as the dimensional requirements are applied. So if you have, for instance, like a single family home or you have your setback requirements for a lot and you say, okay, it's 50 feet setback from the road, you're not sort of doubling that requirement for a duplex, for instance. You're applying it evenly based on if it's a 1 unit structure, 2, 3, or 4 unit structure. Another, I would say, key change, which is new for 2173, is that there was some discussion during the legislative process about how shoreline zoning has always been at play to limit development in environmentally sensitive areas. But there were some areas of some communities that allowed residential uses, but also sort of fell into this definition of environmentally sensitive, but yet still are not in the shoreline zone. And so this legislation is further carving out an exemption for areas that are coastal barrier resource systems, special flood hazard areas, and coastal sand dune systems. And those 3 terms are defined in state statute. And they are also mapped by different state government agencies. So for instance, the coastal barrier resource systems is mapped by the Maine Geological Survey, as well as coastal sand dune systems. And then my office does mapping related to flood hazard areas. So that's another protection that was put into the piece of legislation to ensure that housing is going in areas where housing can be supported and not to the detriment of environmental considerations. I'll stop there before I move on to the next thing. Any questions? Also, other questions?
The only question online is if the recording and the slides would be in it.
Yes. Okay, great. And certainly if you're a community and you're not familiar with those mapping resources or want to learn more about what those 3 environmental areas mean, I'm happy to connect you with folks at the Maine Geological Survey. They've been really helpful as far as explaining what those areas are and how a community can figure out how to exempt them from the types of development in LG 2173. Otherwise, the other this was part of 1829, but and was sort of further clarified in 2173, but thinking about planning board review and how that's no longer allowed to have planning board review for 4 or fewer dwelling units within 1 structure or for accessory dwelling units. And that's sort of the general general statement, but there are of course different fact patterns, maybe like in the shoreline zone where you would still require planning board review, things like that, but it's more of a general prohibition with specific scenarios where planning board review might still be applicable.
Just.
Okay, so really jumping in, I think, to the meat of LD 2173 and where there's probably the most questions. So, and this is, I would say, a significant change from LD 2003 in the sense that LD 2003 was still allowing municipalities to establish minimum lot sizes. And so this is a fairly large change, particularly when you're talking about areas with water and sewer or areas that are in growth areas. So starting in the top, one of the top boxes where you have growth areas that are served by water and sewer. The new minimum lot size requirement is 5,000 square feet or less. So that's specific to growth areas that are served by both public water and public sewer. For growth areas that don't have public water and public sewer, the minimum lot size requirement is 20,000 square feet. And that 20,000 square feet is coming from the state's subsurface wastewater minimum lot size that's in state statute. For any area that falls outside of growth areas but does have service by public water and public sewer, the minimum lot size now is 10,000 square feet or less. And finally, in the last category, which is areas outside of growth areas that do not have public water and public sewer, the only restriction is the state subsurface wastewater minimum lot size. So municipalities can establish that at 20,000 square feet or above. Questions on that?
Yeah. Is it water and or sewer?
And both water and sewer.
Okay, so
Okay. Correct.
So what if you only have one?
Well, if you only have one, it probably wouldn't apply, except for in the cases of, like, if you have a growth area where you have, what is it, public sewer. Growth area. Sorry, sometimes I have to like think about like how this, so the law states that in areas that are non-growth areas, but that have other growth areas that have access to public or to, hold on, let me think about that. I don't know.
Well, I guess, is there a scenario that there's public water but not public sewer?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
so, that first corner is, yeah, so that upper square is growth areas or. No, it's.
Well, it would be.
It's both.
It's
right?
20,000.
So then, so your scenario would be the second, so that would be a growth area without sewer. I think it's actually,
Yeah.
water is not even a part of it.
Yeah, water's not a part of it.
So,
So that would.
in your scenario, it's irrespective if it has water, the point is,
Yeah.
is there sewer service or not? So if it's a growth area and it doesn't have sewer service, then you're in, it's a subsurface waste, it's a septic area, so then the minimum lot size is 20,000 square feet by zoning, but of course, the development could require much more, depending on what the subsurface waste requirements are.
That was more thought experiment than. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I feel like I was.
Well, don't like, a lot of the islands maybe don't have
Yes, that's right.
sewer, but
Yeah.
they may have a growth area.
They're not.
They're not anyway, okay.
Yeah, so we're good.
But I think probably like a lot of Maine has growth areas, but no sewer.
Yeah.
And so probably for,
Right, we're talking the 20,000.
yes, that's 20,000. I mean, most
Yeah.
of the state is not a growth area and not a sewer area, so there's
Yes.
nothing that is related to this.
Mhm.
But for our growth areas, that it would be the 20,000.
Yeah.
How about
Oh, sorry. Raymond's a good
Yeah.
example of that. Their growth area has public water, but they don't have public sewer.
Mhm.
So.
Right, so then that would trigger subsurface.
And can you remind us, Hilary, the sort of served by sewer, you know, there's lots of places where there's not sewer extended to
Mhm.
undeveloped land, but if
Mhm.
you're within. Even if you're within X square feet or a square
There
linear feet,
is,
I can't remember what that
let me
definition
pull
is.
up, I don't have it on a slide. I did print out the legislation because
That's okay, I can look for it, it's in there.
yeah, I will say that this was something that came up a lot during the legislative
Yeah.
process, and public water and public sewer historically were not defined in the law, but this
Yeah.
was something that came up during the
Yeah.
process, so they are now defined.
Yeah.
It's like definitions within definitions.
Yeah, right, yeah,
Yes, but I can,
no, don't worry about it.
okay.
Yeah,
Well, I think. So this one in particular, you'd have to trace back to find out that there is, if you are a sewer district. That there's a requirement that properties that are. Abutting and within 200 feet, or if the development is abutting and within 200 feet, it is compulsive to. Connect to it, but there are also sanitary districts, there's no requirement about that, and there's also local
Right.
requirements, and so it kind of just doesn't speak to that, so. There is a certain amount of, I think, local control, whether, like, there's this example of the sewer that serves the Togus Hospital. It does not serve the properties that it passes, it's a trunk line to the hospital, and so that would be an example of.
yeah,
Those areas are not served by the sewer.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think that's really what the changes in LD 2173 were trying to remedy, because there were some areas where it was just sort of cutting through.
Yeah.
An area as opposed to actually served by.
right,
Mhm.
So what about a non-conforming lot of record? Actually, the guy from the Orchard's here now, he can attest to this, there's a whole bunch of lots in the Orchard that are on 10,000 square foot lots, they have city water, but it's all on septic.
Mhm.
And it's like, that, it works, I mean, they've been doing it forever, so the law of 20,000, could that be possibly changed if it's something that actually works?
Possibly
With the-
changed by the,
By the plumbing code or whatever, right? You were talking.
so in subsurface wastewater rules is 20,000 square feet. There is a process. My understanding, talking to DHHS subsurface wastewater team, there is a process for receiving a waiver at the individual lot level to have a smaller lot size to accommodate septic. But it is a waiver process through the Department of Health.
But wouldn't that be a good gateway to get a lot more lots on 10,000 square foot lots if it actually works? We've been doing it for years in the Orchard and.
I think there's like an almost guaranteed waiver if it's a lot of record.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, why don't they just allow a 10,000 square foot lot to be buildable if it has city water?
The town can do that. The law is just saying that it can't be more than 20,000, but the town can have
Well-
any number or less.
Well, the subsurface wastewater minimum lot size rule is established.
That's true.
Right, so I think it would
That's
just,
true.
that would be a
Yeah.
question,
Yeah.
if you were considering that as a municipality, happy to connect you with Alex Pugh at DHHS who. And it's PUGH, who can answer specific questions about the subsurface wastewater minimum lot size rules and statute. And if there's flexibility for
That could be
these.
huge if you have city water. I mean, 20,000 is now 10,000.
Mhm. I feel like most municipalities are sort of exceeding that 20,000. But there is this waiver process and I don't know. I would defer to him if there's wiggle room
Yeah,
as far as thinking smaller. Mhm.
Okay, and my other question was, you were talking about 4 units in one structure.
Mhm.
All right, why you can't do 4 separate units on a lot, like if you don't want to do some small homes?
You're talking about for the planning board approval process?
Whatever you were talking about here, you were
Um,
mentioning it was just 4 in one building.
So it's for, generally speaking, the allowance or the permitted use is 4 units per lot. And these units can be attached or detached.
Okay.
But the planning board review requirement is specific to 4 or less or fewer
Oh, if you go
units
to the planning
within
board.
one structure.
yeah, sorry to follow up on that,
Yeah.
we've had questions in our office about. So do you have to allow them detached and attached, or can you say they can only be allowed attached?
I think attached or detached, either or.
You have to allow
Mhm.
either
Yes.
configuration.
Yes,
But if it goes to planning board, it's not.
it's not. So the planning board is only specific to 4 or fewer units in one structure.
Okay,
So like a quadplex, a triplex, a duplex.
What the law is saying that if it's in one structure, it cannot be required to go to the planning board.
Generally
What's it
speaking, you know, if it's in the
Staff
shoreline
review.
zone,
Right.
yes, staff review, yep. Code enforcement officer review, yes, correct.
There is a question
Be-
online.
Is there a way to,
Tom, you're able to speak now if you'd like to unmute.
Can you hear me?
yes,
There is such a thing as a minimum lot size law relative to the installation of septic systems. I assume that still applies, and it really governs the size of the lot and whether a system can be put on it. You can get a waiver under the minimum lot size law, which, you know, Old Orchard, I think, has done quite a few of them that way. And then when you get into a small lot with multiple structures, you're supposed to calculate a minimum of 20,000 square feet per 300 gallons. So I don't know how all that plays into it, whether that was ever considered or not, but that's my 2 cents worth.
thanks, Tom, yes, exactly, it was considered, and so actually moving forward. New. One more, yeah. So actually, this is where it is considered, so. So now we've established the minimum lot size, but now we're moving on to talking about density requirements. So if you're in a growth area and served by both public water and public sewer, the density requirement is 1,250 square feet for the first 4 units. Or for the 4 units. You don't need to allow more than 4 units, but it's 4 units. But this is where the next box is where what Tom was getting into, where you're talking about growth areas without public water and public sewer. This is where the state subsurface wastewater minimum lot size rules come in, because it's 20,000 square feet for 1 unit, but then there's a formula to determine lot area for additional units, and that's where the 300 gallons come into play. And I do have a slide later on that provides an example of what that could look like, but this is where I feel like if there are very specific questions, I often defer people to Alex Pugh at the subsurface wastewater unit at DHHS, because he's the one who writes the rules for the minimum lot size. And if you're in a non-growth area with public water and public sewer, this was a change from 1829 to 2173, but the lot area per dwelling unit requirement is 10,000 square feet for 1 unit and 20,000 square feet for 2 units in 1 structure. So that's very specific. But yes, 2 units in 1 structure is 20,000 square feet. And I know there's been some discussion about, I have a slide later on about this, but sort of like what happens to the 3rd and 4th units, because in this scenario, because there's served by public water and public sewer, you can have the 4 units. And so this is an area I want to clarify in the rulemaking process, but it seems like it's up to municipalities to determine if what they want the density requirements for the 3rd and 4th units to be.
Just to clarify, for the growth areas served by water and sewer, after the first 4 units, isn't it the same? Like you also, as a municipality, can choose the per dwelling, minimum lot size after 4?
Yes, and also if you want to allow more than the 4 units.
Yeah.
That was a change from LD 1829 to 2173. And then the final category, again, is the non-growth area without water and sewer, and there are no lot area requirements per dwelling unit, so a municipality can determine what those are. So some municipalities in these rural areas might have the 1 acre minimum lot size lot area per dwelling unit requirement, and so that can continue to stay if they so choose. They can tweak it as long as they're not running afoul of anything in the state's subsurface wastewater rules.
I have a quick question to her.
Yeah.
Regarding water on who gets to determine that. I had a situation, I won't say the town, but when I was building the house, I was doing a future ADU over the garage, which qualifies as an ADU, when we put it on the contract last year. During the build process, the town had changed their ordinance that it can now be an ADU. So as soon as we were done building it, they went to apply to do the ADU themselves. The town, when you get an ADU, they require you to show proof of water. So if you're well, once a gallons per minute, if it's town, they just want to show the proper line. And that was met. However, the water company took it upon themselves to say, no, we're not going to allow it unless you put a new water line, new tap, new water line, all the way back into the house, which it was a slab house, so it just wasn't even possible to do anymore. And the town said, well, we can't allow you to do an ADU anymore because their thing was the liability that if the homeowner had their water shut off, now the ADU can't have water because they didn't pay their bill. It shouldn't be up to them. But there are multi-units that have one water source throughout the state, so it makes no sense. But the town's saying, well, we can't do it now, even though we can prove there's enough water for the unit, because they're trying to say they don't want that liability at the local water company. It makes zero sense. And they knew we were doing an ADU because it was a tough water line. And we explained what we're building, blah, blah, blah. And so that's strange.
Right, the law does require that there is written verification of adequate water and wastewater, but
it said nothing about
sometimes
the liability of one unit versus the other. So in that scenario, who would that homeowner talk to? I mean, we're done with it because we closed, we weren't part of the ADU process, but it was our clients, so we obviously feel bad at the situation.
Yeah, I don't know, actually, I don't know, does anyone have any?
You go to the water company
Yeah.
and explain to them that if you can do it in the department, why can't I do it?
He tried that, yeah, they're just saying they don't want part of it, and I feel like this is gonna happen more, obviously.
Can they just sign a waiver like? You don't,
You would think, but they weren't willing to do anything, and we kind of put it. I was asked to put it to rest, like I said, because it was no longer our issue, but I feel bad because, the intent was to have a future ADU, and it was no longer allowed because of something the water company's doing, not the municipality.
Right.
Technically,
Well, an ADU is not a separate unit, it's considered a single family.
correct, it's an accessory, not even a separate unit.
It's not,
So more reason why they shouldn't be allowed to require a second account and a second tab.
on my lawyer on that one.
So there's a similar dynamic with your sewer connections, because the plumbing code actually requires that each structure have its own connections to the main, not be daisy chained off each other, except for in some circumstances. So you may have many municipalities, many sewer districts may have similar requirements that say you need separate water service, you need separate sewer service. And ultimately, that's up to, my understanding is that's up to the water district, that's up to the sewer district. Well, not the sewer district, and that's the plumbing code. So it's up to your LPI to determine if that is going to apply to your project. I know that's picked up projects that we've had, where they were not expecting to put in an individual sewer service, but that is what the plumbing code asks for. So it's another consideration. Yeah.
Hilary, I just have sorry. It's a completely different question, so if we're not done with that conversation, I can hold up. But, just for the non-growth areas without sewer and water, like, understand that municipalities can decide whatever minimum lot size they want. and whatever minimum lot size per dwelling unit they want. But they do have to allow up to 3 units on those parcels, correct?
Yes, the allowance is for 3 units, but it is subject to things like adequate water and wastewater dimensional requirements. If there are any deed restrictions, things like that, but yes.
And then past 3, you can decide as municipalities not a lot more.
Correct. Yep. Mhm. Oh, and I should say, I don't think I had mentioned this, is that the law allows for one of those units, if somebody is interested in doing that, to be an accessory dwelling unit. So I am talking more about dwelling units in this case, but somebody could have a duplex and include an accessory dwelling unit, and that would be acceptable under the law.
Okay, that actually was another question that I had. So we're talking either 3 units that could be owned by 3 different individual families, or 2 units in an ADU. We're not talking 3 units, then an ADU.
Correct, although in the non-growth area without water and. Yes, exactly, yeah. The 3 units total, but it can be it could be dwelling units. It could be all 3 dwelling units, it could be 2 dwelling units in an ADU. If a municipality chooses, I suppose you could have a dwelling unit and 2 ADUs, but it's really I can get to this later, but it's, 1 accessory dwelling unit is allowed on a lot with single family home or 2 or 3 unit structures.
So if you do a 2-family, you can have an ADU.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
But that's not till July, right, of 27.
Correct. Yep. That's correct.
I'm curious about, in particular, wastewater systems that are at or over capacity or experiencing, some reason where they need to restrict additional flow, and how these rules will apply. Yarmouth is a good example that has a building moratorium in one of their growth zones. Are they allowed to continue, is that allowed, or are we required as, municipalities to allow for the growth, even though the system that's supplying that area is maxed out and not able to continue?
So the law requires that the units are connected to adequate water and wastewater. So these are really questions I think to be discussing with the local LPI about that. I mean, it's really the allowance is there in ordinance, but it doesn't mean it's always going to happen in every scenario. But it certainly, those questions are challenging to know, functionally, if you can actually put additional units based on the capacity of what the infrastructure is. So I think it's an excellent point. But I think it's fact-based analysis based on the units. But again, it's really just allowing the permitted uses in ordinance, but then there are definitely specific scenarios that could restrict development when it's on the ground.
So the restriction, I think I'm concerned our community does not have public sewer or public sewer for sure. But I work with a lot of water and sewer districts and management, and I think there's concern that they will be forced into scenarios where it's untenable for them to operate with the aging infrastructure they have, but they will not, but the litigiousness of potential developers could then push them to exceed capacity.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And certainly I think if there's specific questions about capacity, could certainly connect you with other people who work at the state who just have a better sense of that than I do. But I think it's a fair point, and you're certainly not alone. This has come up in many communities as a area of concern.
Thank you.
There are a few questions.
Yeah.
The first one is in North Yarmouth, there's a proposal for 14 homes in a non-growth area with no public water or sewer. there theoretically be two level structures?
So
Times 14.
I mean, probably not, but it really just depends on what the specific request is and what North Yarmouth is allowing in their local ordinance.
And then the second one is how can the families own homes on the lot? It was asked a few minutes ago, so.
I think there's certainly, I think as far as just how this goes, this is really just talking about allowing the permitted uses, but then there are definitely a lot of legal mechanisms to create condos or other ways of having these housing structures. I would say that's not my area of expertise, and this is probably something for a land use attorney to help with if the developer is thinking about building like 3 individual units per se. But, you know, there are definitely legal possibilities, but it's really just allowing the permitted use, and then people can sort of figure out the mechanisms from there if they want to do some creative thinking. Yeah.
Just, do you mind if I
Yeah, please.
answer that question too? To whoever is online right now, you should contact the city of Saco. They do a lot of what I call house dominiums, which is multiple single family houses on a single lot. So their planning department might be able to give some more insight.
Thank you. That's great.
Well, quick question off of that. If there's an existing development, so let's say hypothetically, Lake Arrowhead, for instance, in Waterboro, they have public water, it's their own little development. They have not been allowing ADUs, saying that it doesn't apply to them because it's their own association. Does this supersede the association rules?
If there are private agreements, those would supersede these laws.
The private agreements would supersede
Assuming
it.
that they're valid and enforceable agreements, they would supersede these general land use planning requirements.
So
And
an
that's
HOA could do that, an HOA could override all this.
Yeah, and that's something that's been in place since LD 2003.
Just like to keep remembering, this law is simply restricting how municipalities can regulate land. It's not doing anything else. It's not saying you can build 4, you can build 3, you can do this. All it's saying is that municipalities can't restrict it based on a certain amount. So there can be private restrictions, there can be state restrictions, there can be all kinds of other encumbrances and site constraints.
And there are, right?
And there really are. So, I mean, in reality, how many lots of 5,000 square feet can you fit 4 units on? In the state, probably not most of them, because there's height limits, there's building coverage limits, there's all kinds of stuff. So it's, yeah, you kind of have to like add it all together.
It's like you said, it's there, but now you gotta figure out how to put it together.
Right. And I think that like, just to sort of segue here, like we had just released a lot of housing data. And thank you for all, I know many of you had submitted this type of housing data to show like how many housing units that we are building. And I think we were pleasantly surprised that we were very much on track and exceeded that. And we were also pleasantly surprised that a lot of this was accessory dwelling units and multifamily affordable units. And so I think that there is sort of this missing middle chunk that is harder to make work from a financing perspective. And so I think, you know, just this law is certainly trying to get at that by allowing these types of duplex, triplex, quadplex, but there's certainly market factors that are at play that would potentially stop that type of development or maybe have somebody think twice about it.
I'm not sure if you're going to get to this later on, but I do have some questions about whether or not you're allowed to have 2 ADUs on a lot, or if the municipality has to allow 2 ADUs, or if they can require that one has to be attached.
The minimum requirement is 1 ADU on a lot with a single family home, a 2-unit structure, or a 3-unit. That's the minimum requirement. Certainly, if the municipality wants to allow more accessory dwelling units on a lot, that is a choice.
So even in the growth area with water and sewer, if someone has, let's say, a duplex on that lot, they aren't necessarily by law allowed to have 2 ADUs to make it 4 units. Because the law says 4 units including ADUs, but it doesn't say
Yeah, it's just
including one.
one ADU.
180.
One ADU, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. And I also should say that the ADU section is not specific to growth areas. So it's talking about in areas that permit residential uses, you can have one accessory dwelling. But again, so I should say, I'm like jumping all over the place based on the questions, but the rule is open right now for comment. So I think this is a great time, if you look at the rule and see things that can be further clarified, like things like that, please let me know, put it in writing, and we can make those type of changes to provide better guidance and clarity on some things that are confusing.
There is a raise.
Yep.
Hello, you unmuted me.
Yep, go ahead, Tom.
This all raises some very interesting questions, both from, I guess, philosophical and practical sides. I mean, everyone deserves some housing. I'll say that to start off. But it really, there are too many moving parts that have not been clearly defined. We just touched on a couple of them. The required versus allowed. There's a big difference, but most people are interpreting allowed as required, but it really creates a significant impact on local infrastructure. What we've been doing in Biddeford is if someone has wants to do an ADU, if they're connected into their existing building and connect their existing sewer, then they just, go through the normal process. If they have a separate unit, then our ordinance says they have to have a separate sewer connection. So therein raises the cost. On septic systems, I know I've had a discussion with several LPIs and their interpretation, and the state has too, by the way, that if it's a separate dwelling unit, in other words, an ADU, the minimum size for a septic system is for a two-bedroom home. And they require a septic tank for each unit. So, there's some really points that haven't been adequately discussed and considered. All these tend to raise the cost and therefore raises the cost of the structures. We're a CSO community. We don't need any more stormwater in our areas that are combined. We've been trying for 30 years to separate. We're getting there, but we're not there. And the last thing we need to do is have more volume discharged into the water body and face some significant fines. Traffic wasn't considered. Had one dwelling unit, 10 trips a day average. And probably the numbers have been reduced lately, but still could impact traffic movement. I just touched on, and then stormwater, even not on a combined sewer system. Where does the stormwater go? Do you require them to put in stormwater management systems so the impervious area doesn't increase, or what? So I mean, it's left me scratching my head as a practitioner, and I don't know how codes, and I'm not going to speak for codes, certainly, how they interpret stuff, but it just needs to be better definition, in my opinion. And I'm not defending the water company, but the reason they do that, and there is a conflict there on, someone brought it up about multifamily apartments. And I think the water company's rule, as I understood it, is that if they're separate entities, you can't share a water meter. So if they want to shut off house A because of non-payment, they won't affect house B. The issue, or if it's an apartment unit and there's one owner and one entity paying the bill, then they have someone to go after and the whole building gets shut down. But there are other public health and safety issues that sort of are intertwined in this whole thing. So, say, I'm not trying to be a restrictionist, but I don't know that it was well thought out. I know why it was enacted, and I certainly, like I said when I started, everyone deserves a place to live and a decent place to live. But gosh, I don't, too many moving parts that are ill-defined, in my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think you do raise a good point that this does intersect a lot more than just talking about municipal land use planning. We're talking about other state government offices, local offices. I have had conversations with the subsurface wastewater team, just for instance, about thinking about this ADU issue, and then, it's not necessarily clear in their rules about what an ADU needs for septic. And so, it certainly takes time for them to update rules or update statutes, but I think it's things that we are thinking about. I don't know, Greg, if you have anything you want to add about sort of like, these are barriers that we've been thinking about at MOCA and at the governor's office to try to tackle beyond just sort of this initial zoning issues.
I just wanted to start on this thing. I had a question about that first. It says not required, or does that mean that it's not required to be not required? Right. Is may not require it? Is that what that means?
So this area is a little sticky, I would say. But it's essentially saying that a municipality can't require sprinklers in accessory dwelling units unless they're connected to two or more structures. Two or more units, excuse me.
Okay.
And I will say that this is the one section that is already in place, that it went into effect on July 29th of this year. So that is the one exception to the rule about the July 1st, 2027. I would say most communities, they don't have anything written in ordinance, except for probably in this area. So this doesn't necessarily apply, but I think for your community, some of you do have language written into ordinance about sprinklers and accessory dwelling units.
Is this in effect in Portland still?
That's interesting. I don't know whether this is still in effect. There's definitely language in the technical manual here about
It's in the
sewer.
fire code.
Yeah, well, and then I was thinking about the sewer connection conversation earlier. There's definitely language in the technical manual there. And there's also language, I know we changed the language about ADUs and fire suppression at some point in the not so distant past, so you'd have to look in, I'm not sure.
And I would say questions about this, I have been directing people to the fire marshal's office because it falls under Title 25, which is not part of the land use laws that are in Title 30-A. So that's what I've been doing, but I understand this area of law is confusing for people. But yes, back to slides.
But that's what it says. Okay.
But again, this is also not something that's in rulemaking either, because we don't have authority over the specific area because it does fall under the fire marshal's office. Anyway, so that's my understanding of it as today. Okay, so redirecting back to ADUs, I answer some of the questions, but again, ADUs are allowed on lots with single family homes. And now there's this addition or 2 or 3 unit structures. So that could be like duplexes or triplexes in areas that allow residential uses. So we're not talking just about growth areas or areas with water and sewer. And this is this definition in state statute of accessory dwelling unit. But we've always told municipalities that they are welcome to tweak this definition, because what we're finding is it is a little challenging sometimes in local regulations to differentiate between an accessory dwelling unit and a dwelling unit. So oftentimes the distinction is really based on size. So that's still in there from LD 2003, where municipalities can establish a maximum size for accessory dwelling units.
Just quick question, for the definitions of ADUs,
Mhm.
is it all right for a municipality to specify that it's either a single family, two family, or three family structure that an ADU can be attached to? Like within the definition itself?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, yeah, because this definition is multi-unit structure, but then the actual ADU, so this doesn't come from the accessory dwelling unit statute. This is in another definition statute, but the ADU statute talks about single family, 2 unit or 3 units. So yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Another probably larger change that many of you may have put in during the first round of LD 2003 changes was having an owner occupancy requirement related to accessory dwelling units, in the sense that you were requiring the owner of the lot to live in either of the units, the ADU or the existing single family home. So those type of ordinance provisions are no longer allowed. So if you have those, they will need to be removed from your local ordinance.
What do you mean again? Like, you have to have one person has to be on the deed, right? Of an ADU? Are you saying that doesn't have to be that way anymore?
Well, nothing to do with the deed. If you just, some municipalities have a requirement that says you have to live in either one of the units. I think the thought behind it was to ensure that there, aren't absent landlords or anything like that.
Correct.
But that can no longer be a requirement. And
Really? That a good call? Now you're just making a 2-unit.
So all kinds of.
I mean, I'm a developer and I'd love to get as many as possible, but I'm on the planning board in Biddeford and we've talked about this, and our thing is like, we're just making it a 2-unit now. So it's gonna be rentals. The idea is to have someone at home have their kids or their parents stay, or have somebody to help offset their taxes and to stay in your house. I think that's the spirit of it. I don't really think it should be turned into why it's just 2-unit now? So it's not even ADU anymore. So I don't know what your thoughts are, but anybody else?
certainly, that was a decision that was made at the legislative level, and so this is what the language is now. But I think certainly if communities are concerned about rentals or short-term rentals like that they could have a separate ordinance related to short-term rentals.
That, so you could home rule that, like in your.
With short-term.
Oh, really?
Rentals?
For
Yes.
short-term rentals, not for ADU.
Oh, no,
But not-
not for ADUs.
Yeah. So
Wow.
certainly, go ahead. Yep.
No, I was just saying, doesn't it have to be accessory to one of the units?
The accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah, and so there's the relationship, right? So it's 3 plus 1 related to.
In practice, that's what, anecdotally, I'm sure many of you see that people are building these units for family members or, someone that they know. But I think the idea behind this was to allow for, broader rental opportunities. But I think in practice, anecdotally, I've just heard that mostly it's for people are building these for family members or people that they know. So.
And that residency requirement is specific to the owner. The owner does not have to be residing.
In either of the units, correct, yeah.
Did that go into effect in July?
It will be July 1st of 2027.
That's what the next year.
Yep, and then.
I think to that point, I never thought of it that way, but with this with the owner removal, the term accessory really should be revisited because it's not accessory.
Yeah.
If you now have 2 condo units and you're calling one an accessory to the other unit, but there's no definition that owner is subject to anything different than the primary owner. You're almost creating a dynamic where someone feels like they actually have more control over the property rights and title or interest than the other one. But so it's not really the right term if we're removing the ownership requirement, but
It's just
perhaps I'll get revisited.
But hang on.
We have this in our code right now, and it is awkward, right? We talk about this all the time with people. You can either do a 4-family or you can do a 3-family with an ADU. And the only advantage in doing an ADU is that we exempt ADUs from other dimensional standards.
Mhm.
So there's some advantage in doing an ADU, but we also limit them in size. That's the only way they're an accessory. Otherwise, they are just another unit. And that was something our council did years ago. They just said every residential lot can have 2 ADUs, period, done.
I think to a
And it's a
new,
density bonus.
I think to a new resident or a new elected official or a new planning board member, it's going to become a very confusing term.
Yeah, it
with
is.
this new
Yeah,
It is.
flexibility.
it certainly does create some confusion, and I think
Yeah.
for many communities, the only distinction is really talking about the size, but some communities have, like, with form-based code, have really kind of removed this distinction between accessory dwelling units and dwelling units, and they're just saying 4 units.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think this legislation is probably getting closer to that, but you're absolutely right that the unit, the one accessory dwelling unit is exempt from any lot area requirements, so it does make it in theory easier to put on a lot.
Oh, pardon.
Just to clarify, it's not ownership. It's owner occupancy.
Mhm.
So the law's not speaking to if the ADU and the single family home are owned separately. That's entirely up to the municipality, and I think there's probably no municipality that will allow them to be sold separately. But the law is just saying that a town can't require that the owner live on the property. If that makes sense.
No, that helps actually. So you're saying the municipality can control,
That means sold separately.
can require
Exactly.
joint ownership
Exactly.
of an ADU and a
Yeah.
primary structure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's different.
So
All right, that's-
conduit it, you can't conduit it, is what you're saying.
I don't know of any municipality that would allow that, because then it's just 2 principal dwelling units. There's no
It's just
accessory.
form of ownership of condos.
Yeah, which is fine, and so there can be a way to build an ADU in a single family home, and then 10 years later, they want conduit. And as long as you have a process, you can allow for that. Now you have 2 primary dwelling units in family owned. That's fine, but that requires process to do that.
It's still on one lot.
I mean, but that's fine, though. That's just a current.
It's just kind of weird.
I mean, I'll share, I think my perspective from working with some of the legislators involved with this, it was very intentional. Try to dissolve this distinction of what an ADU is and a dwelling unit. So I think we're all struggling with that, and that was a part of their intent, was to try to make a struggle, I guess.
So I think the intent of the ADU is just try to stay in your house and keep your family by. You know, whether kids going to college, coming back, getting started, you know, and you move to the little unit, they move to the big unit, and as it grows, is to keep the family involved. It's, I think, the intent of it.
That was the original intent.
Right, now
Yeah.
it's become just another rental, you know, and I don't know, it seems like a lot of paperwork for going around for the same, we're coming up in the same spot as a 2-family.
Eli, correct me if I'm wrong, part of the consideration on this too had to do with traditional financing restricting the development of ADUs. And by removing the owner occupancy requirement, it opened up a realm of financing that didn't exist to property owners previously. So folks that might have had the interest and intention for whatever purpose of building maybe you were limited in the financial instruments that they were able to access because of the way the owner occupancy requirement was previously. Now, you know, this was going to be able to expand and broaden that capability. So I think that was a functional consideration of it as well.
That was my understanding of it too, is that it would allow developers who are making large subdivisions to create ADUs within that subdivision and get the right financing for it.
I mean, I just think it's gonna play out where guys are just gonna buy these houses and add ADUs to them and just keep them and rent them out, and you're just gonna get a bunch of renters. You're not gonna have home ownership. That's, I think, what we're trying to create here.
Try and create housing.
Huh. The idea, right, we're trying to create housing, and that there are different ways that we can provide housing to people, whether that be through rental or home ownership, and it's sort of opening the door for things that may not have been allowed.
Just thinking of older, you know, I live in Biddeford and we got some older neighborhoods, and people, if they just start doing this, you're just creating more of a rental scene than it is a home ownership scene. We're trying to get more home ownership. Like every town's different, so it's not like a one shoe fits everything on this. I think every town's gonna have to kind of go through this in their comp plan and see how, you know, how it's gonna fit in their town.
Certainly, yes. Oh, also just one more thing on this slide. Again, there is the exemption of areas that are coastal barrier resource systems, special flood hazard areas, and coastal sand dune systems from allowing this accessory dwelling unit section, as long as municipalities are including that in the ordinance. Okay, so this section of law is talking about the affordable housing density bonus. And so just as a refresher, this is allowing developers to have a 2.5 times greater density bonus if they're talking about affordable housing developments that are located in growth areas or areas with public water and public sewer. But the additional part of this that LG 2173 added was a height bonus of 14 feet or up to 55 feet total. But the key is that this is not absolute, that it does require review by the fire marshal's office to determine for safety purposes, to make a safety assessment.
Just quick question. I had always assumed that this portion, like the density bonus and the height bonus, was only in growth zones that also had water and sewer. I didn't realize that this height bonus and density bonus was anywhere that was water and sewer.
It's growth areas or areas with public water and public sewer.
Okay.
Isn't there's language though about where multifamily is allowed?
Yep, you're right. Yep.
So
it's only in areas that allow multifamily housing and areas that have density requirements.
yeah. So we actually spent a lot of time showing on this one because multifamily in state statute is three plus.
Yeah.
And anywhere in growth areas or where there's water, so we have to allow 4.
Yes.
So we basically allow the density bonus citywide.
Yes.
Which is not necessarily, maybe it wasn't the intent, but it's like a little bit of a weird overlap that we've struggled a little bit with because we don't necessarily want to see a 12-unit building on a green field in North Deering, even though a 4-unit and North Deering is feels perfectly appropriate for some of the same reasons actually Tom was mentioning, right? Like those are people who are going to drive live on a cul-de-sac and or whatever. So yeah, I think in response to some of our questions about this, you said that we can define multifamily. We do define multifamily in our code differently.
Yes, and I think that is some solution that municipalities are doing. Eli, I feel like you have mentioned that before too, as something that.
Yeah, we chewed on that also, and I guess we did a different route where, pre-LD 2003, we had our multifamily zones and our non-multifamily zones, right? Most of the city is not multifamily zones. And post LD 2003, those zones, the non-multifamily zones, simply said 2 or 3 units are allowed for the purpose of state law, blah, 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 blah. However, not for the purpose of the affordable housing density bonus. So we didn't ever allow multifamily. We just allowed consistency with the state law being 2 and 3 units. I mean, it hasn't been challenged. I'm not sure. I guess it's working, and so we're able to, I guess, avoid the mitigate the issue that you're. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful.
And again, there's the exception for those 3 environmentally sensitive defined areas in statute as well. Okay. This section is talking about rate of growth ordinances. So I should say that this is not part of the rulemaking process because we don't have authority over the specific section. But essentially, LG 2173 was making some fairly significant changes to rate of growth ordinances that municipalities create at the local level. I'm assuming maybe many of you in this room do have rate of growth ordinances or no? Who does? I see 1 hand, 2 hands, 4 hands. Okay. So I feel like Eli could probably explain this a lot better than I can, but essentially it is stating that municipalities can still establish growth permits in different areas of their community, but if they are setting caps on areas that fall in the growth areas, there's a very specific way to calculate the number of permits that can be in growth areas. I think that's probably the simplest way to put it without reading the statute verbatim. But for any specific questions about that, I'll probably do my best to stumble through it, but I also would appreciate, feedback from others in the group who are more well-versed in rate of growth ordinances than I am.
I think that the net effect is that if you have rate of growth caps in growth areas today, very likely those caps will be so high that you will never meet them in the future. Just in your growth areas. You can still charge your fee, you can still have the scheme, you can still have your designated zones. But I don't think you would probably ever let you have a cap that's low enough that you would reach it. Outside the growth area, it's fair game. Everything's, how it's been. And that includes transitional areas too. I think it's only in growth areas specifically that it's essentially a prohibition on caps, like in effect. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say that there has been, I've just received a lot of questions from communities about the difference between growth areas and transitional areas as far as thinking about comprehensive plans. And so those are two terms that are defined differently in the Growth Management Act. So I will say that, there have been some communities who have been thinking about growth areas versus transitional areas, and that's certainly something that's still on the table as far as the comprehensive planning process. And those are two defined terms that are different. So I'm happy to provide those two terms if this is something that your community is questioning about the difference between growth areas and transitional areas. Okay, this section of law has to do with planning board training requirements. And I will say, so the law is requiring current planning board members and newly appointed planning board members to take a training on land use planning. The term is not defined in state statute. And so I think the best guidance that I've received from a municipal attorney who is advising their municipal clients is that anything that could fall in the realm of land use planning training, including trainings provided by the Maine Municipal Association, trainings provided by local regional councils, if that's an option, planning board trainings provided by municipal council, or potentially even trainings like this provided by the Maine Office of Community Affairs can count towards that planning board training requirement. And I should say that this law is really only a one-time requirement. It's not an annual reoccurring requirement for members to take this training. So I would say if you're doing something that falls within the realm of land use planning training, I would write it down and keep track of it. But otherwise, there's no requirement to be reporting it to my program, for instance. That's not super clear and helpful, but that's sort of where we are right now with that piece of legislation, with that specific provision, rather.
A question about this. I feel like the answer should be no, but I'm gonna let you answer it. When I previously was working with a planning board, they had their yearly FOAA training. That wouldn't count towards this, right?
Probably not, because it wouldn't maybe necessarily fall under land use planning training. But there is no specific definition of land use planning training. So I think the idea initially was maybe thinking about planning board training, thinking about procedures or, sort of like what MMA provides, but arguably land use planning training is broader than that too. So yes, sorry.
No,
Probably not, but maybe.
I feel like it's not the intent of what they were going for, but I was just curious.
the Maine Association of Planners is trying to work with MOCA and pull together a training. It may still take another year, 6 months or a year, but hopefully we'll have something fruitful to share soon.
And I will say for current members, the 180 days has already gone past, because that was in March, because the legislation was September. So it's really just like now it's newly appointed members have 180 days after appointment to take this type of trainings.
There was a question online. Does this mandatory training apply to the ZBA of this town?
Yes, I think it does, because it's not talking about, I should say it's not talking just planning board members. I should have been more clear with my language that yes, it's broader than that. All right, can you see? Okay, this is something that wasn't amended in LD 2173 as far as the actual language, but as many of you know, that subdivision law definition has many different definitions in that section of statute, like maybe 3 or 4 definitions of what a subdivision is. And so this specific change in LD 1829 was saying that 5 or more units that are placed or constructed on a lot are subject to subdivision review, whereas it used to be 3 or more units constructed or placed on a lot are subject to subdivision review, but it didn't touch anything related to division of lots. So that's still 3 or more lots that are divided within a 5-year period of time are subject to subdivision review. And also LD 2173 did extend the deadline for compliance for this until July 1st, 2027, if municipalities need to update their definition of subdivision and local. All right, moving away from 2173 and 1829, LD 997 passed in 2025. But this is coming up again in the sense that 2173 has extended the deadline for making changes in local ordinance to July 1st, 2027 related to residential uses and commercial. Copies, I know we're moving through this pretty slowly, so happy to answer specific questions about that section of law, but I think it is important to note that municipalities do have more time for this.
Just gonna keep asking
No,
questions.
please do.
So I feel like that there was some sort of exception that was added to this, that if there were industrial.
Oh, yes,
uses-
thank you. Yes, that's a good point. I think it's actually on the slide. You're right. Yep. Yeah, zones allowing industrial uses are exempt from this requirement.
So I'm just kind of interested, because like in the municipality I used to work for, they had industrial and commercial uses in certain areas. Like, does even having one industrial use in a commercial area negate the possibility of, housing in that area? I'm just kind of.
Yes, I think this is a good question, and I think this is something that I want to address in rulemaking to make more clear. So I don't think I have an answer today, but I would welcome feedback, like exactly some specific scenarios on that, so I can understand what communities have for zones and how this would impact them based on definitions of industrial uses. So I would welcome that. And the rule's open right now, so.
Well,
Thank you.
That they're exempt from the requirement, but it doesn't say that they can't allow it. Like a municipality could decide to allow residential.
Certainly.
In a zone that allows.
Certainly, but I think there needs to be, the confusion is sort of defining what industrial uses means. And it seems a bit unclear in sort of what are the bounds of that, especially if you have industrial and commercial uses in one zone.
In one zone,
Yeah.
fair. Okay.
There's a raised hand.
Yep.
Danny, you should be able to.
Thank you. Just wanted to jump in on that topic. We did want to make sure that, industrial park areas were not going to be required to have residential uses being placed in them from a taxation standpoint, where, we have to think about the overall utilization of our communities and having a tax base. But I know for Portland, there was concerns related to the working waterfront, and the hope that this doesn't push out the working waterfront areas that otherwise would then be mandated to have to, be residential if they were zoned working waterfront. So I think we just want to be very careful about how things are worded in rules so that we don't create inadvertent consequences.
Thanks, Jenny. I certainly would welcome anything in writing from you so that I can respond to that. Thanks.
Thank you.
And you. Thank you. All right. And LD 427 is a section of statute that talks about parking requirements in growth areas. And again, this takes effect for municipalities on July 1st, 2027. I would say the key to this section of law is saying that municipalities can't require more than one off-street parking space per dwelling unit in designated growth areas. So this is specific to designated growth areas, not across the board. Otherwise, it does allow municipalities to create, well, what's a fancy term for, they say transportation demand management strategies, but it's just a fancy way of saying, other ways to have parking, whether that be like agreements with local businesses or something like that. So there's that allowance there for communities to think creatively about parking. And it also says that if you do have these offsite parking agreements, that these parking agreements need to be with existing parking facilities that fall 0.25 miles away from any development. This is also kind of tucked into LD 2173, but it's relevant to your community in the sense that, you might be doing ordinance amendments right now. And so this would be something that you'd want to keep in mind. But the law does allow for childcare facilities and family childcare providers to be in areas that allow residential uses. And those two terms, the child care facility and family child care providers, are defined in state statute. And they're subject to the same requirements as land use and zoning requirements as single family homes. I sort of mentioned this already, but there are some additional definitions that were included in LD 2173. That includes the definition of public water and also public sewer. And so I certainly can provide those to anyone that needs them after this. I can put them in an email so that you have them. So if you want to put them in local ordinance, you can. And otherwise, I know I've said this before already, but I think it's really important to reiterate that for implementation at the local level for these changes, for the most part, it's July 1st, 2027, with the exception of any language related to sprinklers and accessory dwelling units, which doesn't have this July 1st, 2027 deadline, and that already went into effect this past month. Seeing as we've been going for like an hour and 20 minutes, I'm sure people want to, get home. There are some frequently asked questions on this slide, but I also want to hear from you if you have other questions that are more pressing or ideas about implementation or other thoughts, comments.
Thank you. We have to update our growth area map in the comprehensive plan, and I was wondering if there was any established requirements that we'll need to meet in order to define that growth area.
Not that I'm aware, but I think that I would direct that question to the Municipal Planning Assistance Program, which is also in MOCA, because they are the entity that is reviewing comprehensive plans and can provide better guidance than I can on those type of requirements. But I'm happy to connect you with them.
And they still have to review and approve a comprehensive plan amendment prior to the July 2027.
Well, they're reviewing plans for consistency. Certainly, communities do not have to go that route if they don't want to, but that it's an option for communities. But whatever they do have in their comprehensive plan, whether it's found consistent or not, is applicable to LD 2003, 1829, and 2173.
Okay, thanks.
That was a related question. I sat in a committee meeting yesterday. I don't know how many other communities are doing this, but where I live, they have growth areas and limited growth areas. So now the committee members are freaked out the word growth in any part. So they're going to shrink their growth area probably. So it's Dumoka now. And that was my question is are they up to that deadline, or that's kind of a separate track? Like if you want to redo your future land use map,
Separate track.
go ahead. You just got to follow the Growth Management Act.
Separate track. Yep.
And I'll just say, just anecdotally, this group also was confused with the transitional thing. So even though there are areas that might have water and sewer that are in a growth area now, if they pull back, those areas might seem right for a transitional. They seem, nope, it's either going to be a growth area or a non-growth area. That's just feedback I'm hearing from residents.
Yeah, and I think I'm happy to connect you with the MPAT, the Municipal Planning Assistance Program, because they can probably provide better information about the growth areas, transitional areas, rural areas than I can, but they are defined in statute. But yeah, I don't think, I haven't reviewed a ton of comprehensive plans, but it feels like transitional areas are not as common as, so this is maybe a newer thing. But yeah, it's a good question, because as you know, like a lot of this density is directed towards growth areas. Other questions or comments, thoughts about this? And I will just say, I think I've covered some of these frequently asked questions, but we can provide the slides. And so I had talked about calculating minimum lot size based on the subsurface wastewater minimum lot size rule. So that's an example that's in here just as an example, but certainly, you know, if there's specific questions, I can direct you to the subsurface wastewater team about this. But and then this next question has to do with sort of Tom's point that he brought up earlier about detached accessory dwelling units and whether they need a separate septic system, or sort of how does the subsurface wastewater rules interpret that. And so this is just one example from the wastewater rules about how they determine bedroom count and sort of like output based on gallons per day. But I know that this is sort of caused confusion for people because it's not standardized based on, it's an ADU, therefore it, you know, this is what you need for septic. It does vary based on what you're trying to build.
Hilary, just to respond to a question in chat, if you're on this list or registered for the Zoom, we will send the slide out by the end of the day.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then we did talk about this for a bit earlier, but there is a slide that talks about the waiver process at the state level for the subsurface wastewater size and what that looks like. Oh, and I talked about rule making, I feel like I'm nauseam at this point, but the rule is currently open and it will be open until September 18th. And so if you have comments, please send them my way. And I have my email on the last slide. I really welcome feedback to make sure that there are areas where we need to provide additional clarity, we can. So, and if you need help finding the rule, please email me. I can give you the proposed rule.
I believe when we were implementing LD 2003, there was state-based funding to support communities in doing land use updates. Is that also?
Yes, so we've done 2 rounds already. And so we've had about probably about 120 municipalities take us up on the first 2 rounds of funding. We are anticipating doing a 3rd round, but I would, from a show of hands, maybe also on Zoom and in the room, if you haven't applied but you're interested, would you raise your hand? Because I'm trying to sort of gauge how much funding we have, and I would love to support as many towns as possible. So if you're interested, let me know when you haven't applied yet. And I have a feeling that this funding will probably come out maybe either late September or sometime in October for the third round of funding. But certainly if you have questions about it, it's a pretty low barrier application. It's really simple, like one pager to get this funding. And the only requirement is that you're sending us your ordinances so we know you're on track, and then you have to comply or have to go through the process by the end of July 2027. But right now we have it set at $10,000 for each municipality. And there's just one more slide. Oh, actually, and then we are doing more technical assistance sessions. So we're doing another one similar to this in the SMPDC area, so Southern Maine, on September 8th. And then I also have some things scheduled via Zoom, very low barrier, for anyone who wants to attend on September 2nd. And I do the same slideshow presentation and answer questions. And I think we'll be scheduling more throughout the fall as well. But also I should say, if you have questions, please email me. I mean, I think that this is, things come up as you're starting to dig through ordinances that you didn't think about. So happy to answer individual questions anytime. And I think and housing.moca@maine.gov is sort of our joint mailbox, and that's an easy way to get a hold of me. And the last slide. All right, any other questions? Great, well, I'll plan to stick around for a few minutes if something else comes up, but I really appreciate your time and your thoughtful feedback. And also, please, I'm going to put another plug in for rulemaking comments. It's really helpful to get feedback from municipal folks in the room, because I certainly don't know about all the nuances on the ground. So if you can think of specific scenarios of something that might need further clarity, I would really appreciate that feedback. But thank you.